Hey everybody. So let's get started building our order form app. You've already been playing with some of this code, so it should already be working for you. But let's run it and just take a look to see if we can understand a little bit about what it does. So you can see right now that it has all of our user interface elements visible. We have a stepper to select the number of sandwiches, a stepper for the salads, a stepper for desserts, and our little switch that goes back and forth to indicate whether we need silverware or not in our app. You'll also notice that we have our subtotal, tax, and total variables visible here. And if you look at the code, the text that is being used there is using these variables total before tax, tax amount, and total with tax. And this is all hard-coded along with a nice little function that makes it so that instead of showing a full double with lots and lots of zeros after the decimal point, it just rounds it and displays two digits for cents. So this is working pretty well for us so far, except that it doesn't change anything. We can't actually change the number of sandwiches, change the number of salads, or anything like that. So we're going to start by updating the functions that take care of that. Let's take a look at the stepper to see how that works. So right here is the stepper code, and we can see that it has some inputs for what it should do when the number of sandwiches is increased, so that's on increment, and when that number is decreased, that's on decrement. And I've created two functions, increment sandwich and decrement sandwich, to handle that. So let's see if we can fill in those two functions with some code to actually make this work as expected. So if I go to increment sandwich, let's think about what I would like to have happen here. If I hit the plus button on the sandwich stepper, I would like the number of sandwiches that is stored in my application to go up by 1. I can see I have a variable of sandwiches that is storing this information. So inside this function, which is called when you hit the plus button, I want to take that number of sandwiches I want to take the number of sandwiches and I want to increase it by 1. Now, you might remember I have a couple of ways that I can do this. I can do number of sandwiches is equal to number of sandwiches plus 1. Or I can use the faster method, which takes number of sandwiches plus equals, just means add 1 to that variable. So that's what we've done. If I run the code, I can now continue adding sandwiches. But that looks like a little bit too many. So if I hit the minus button, I should see that number of sandwiches decrease. But I haven't implemented that yet. So I'm going to go to my stepper. I go to the decrement sandwich function. I see that that's the function that is called when I hit the minus button on my sandwich stepper. I find that function, and now I know I just want to do the reverse. So I can run the code, and sure enough, when I press this, the sandwiches go up, and when I press the minus button, now the sandwiches goes down. Except we have a problem. If I keep pressing the minus button, you can see that now I have somehow ordered negative numbers of sandwiches. So I want to prevent this from happening by adding a conditional statement inside of my decrement sandwich function. So if I think about it, the only time I want to decrease the number of sandwiches is if the number is greater than 0. So I can put in a conditional statement to make sure that happens. So this means that we'll only be decreasing the number of sandwiches if I've ordered more than 1 or more. Let's try running the code. So you can see that when I click the plus button now, it goes up, and now when I hit the minus button, it goes down. But once it's at 0, it doesn't go below 0. So that's working really well. Now that I've figured out that code, I can actually take that same structure of the code and put it into the other functions for my other steppers. You can see that the structure for the other steppers is the same. I'm calling a function when the plus button is hit on the salad stepper, and I'm doing the same thing on the minus button. So these functions are really going to be the same. They're going to have the same structure, but what's going to be different is with the increment sandwich, I'm changing the number of sandwiches variable, and in the others, I'm going to be doing this with the number of salads and number of desserts, respectively. So let me update the code. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. Let's check and make sure that that's working as expected. So now if I start hitting the up button on the sandwiches, it goes up. Same thing with salads, and I can also go back down. And the desserts, I can also go up and bring it back down. So I know that all of that is working. Let's also now think about our next step. So we already have this variable, a variable called need silverware, silverware needed up here, that is linked to the toggle button in our list. So this is right here. Anytime the toggle is changed, the silverware needed variable is updated to say whether that toggle is selected yes or no. So now that we have all our numbers here, what we would like to do is be able to calculate the subtotal. The subtotal is the total amount that you're paying before tax. So it's our total value before tax. And we already have a variable up here called total before tax, but it is locked to $7 right now, or 7.00. So what we should do is we should now update this to return the value of what we get when we take the number of sandwiches times their cost, the number of salads times the cost, the number of desserts times the cost, and that extra dollar for needing silverware or not. And we can then make it so that instead of returning a random number, it returns the result of all of that. So let's write a new function that goes with our list here. And let's make this function a function that takes the number of each item and that Boolean for whether silverware is needed and calculates a total and stores it in the result. So it returns that value. It has inputs, number of sandwiches, number of salads, number of desserts, and also silverware needed. And the output is just going to be a double because we want to know what is the total cost. And so let's write a function called calculate subtotal. So we can see in our function I'm taking in the number of sandwiches, which is an integer, the number of salads, also an integer, the number of desserts, which is an integer, and also the silverware needed, which is just true or false based on whether this switch is selected. And you can see I'm returning a double. I'm getting this error because I've told Swift that my function should return a double value, but right now it's not returning it. So this is a good place to basically say I want to return some value that I'm going to call a subtotal. So let's now calculate what this subtotal is going to be. So I know that the start of our subtotal is going to be equal to the number of sandwiches times the sandwich cost. And I'm going to continue writing this expression for each of my items. And I'm just getting these variables. These are just going to come from the top of my struct where I've set all these values. Okay, so you can see I'm taking the number of sandwiches times each of these variables, just adding them together. I am getting a little bit, I am getting an error. Let's see why that might be. I'm also realizing I should make this a var subtotal because in just a moment I'm going to add in a statement about that silverware cost, and I haven't done that quite yet. Now there is a little bit of an issue that's going to come up here, and that is that number of sandwiches is actually an integer, but sandwich cost, you can see up here, is a double. So I am going to need to convert number of sandwiches into a double so I don't get any issues. Okay, now that I've done that, The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this total before tax, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to return this calculate subtotal right here, and I'm going to call this function, and I'm going to put in all of these variables. So So I did have to restart Playgrounds. I was running into a little bit of an issue, but I haven't changed the code from what you saw in the last frame. And so you can see that now, with each of these, as I change these numbers, the subtotal is staying up to date, and that's what I want. So I'm going to finish this video and move on to the next of updating the tax and the total.